The massive halls of the Zurich Tribunal gleamed with ancient technology, their golden inscriptions detailing the history of countless civilizations that had tried and failed. At the very center stood a towering monolith, its dark surface pulsing with alien energy. This was the Century Trial, a challenge so difficult that no species had ever completed it in less than 100 years. It was designed to test intelligence, endurance, adaptability, and survival. The galaxy had long considered it the ultimate measure of a species' worth, a trial that separated the weak from the strong. The Zirek themselves, one of the oldest and most advanced races in the universe, had taken 78 years to complete it, and they were still considered legends for their achievement. Other species had taken even longer. Some had never finished. Now it was humanity's turn, and the galaxy had gathered to watch. The audience was filled with representatives from countless alien races, their eyes brimming with amusement and curiosity. The humans, a relatively new and unproven species, had been foolish enough to accept the challenge. Whispers of mockery filled the grand chamber. How long before they quit? A reptilian Joltak warrior sneered, flashing his sharp teeth. They will fail in the first stage. An elder Zirek muttered, nodding in agreement. But then the humans arrived. A group of 50 men and women, dressed in advanced yet minimal gear, stepped forward onto the trial grounds with quiet confidence. At the front was Commander Alex Graves, his sharp gaze scanning the towering monolith that controlled the test. Unlike the nervous, uncertain expressions of past challengers, the humans looked ready. They looked eager. A deep, ancient voice echoed through the halls as the trial began. "Welcome, humans. The Century Trial begins now." The first test activated, a labyrinth of logic and ancient puzzles, each more complex than the last. In the past, this stage had taken some species 20 years to solve. It required deep understanding, patience, and an ability to think in multiple dimensions. The Zirek leaned forward, expecting the humans to stare blankly, confused and overwhelmed. But instead, something incredible happened. The humans did not hesitate. They split into teams, coordinating instantly. Some worked on mathematical sequences, others on alien languages, and a few even started rewriting the logic of the puzzles altogether. They used AI assistance, real-time communication, and problem-solving techniques that no other species had even considered. Minutes passed, then hours. And then, to the shock of every alien watching, the first section was complete. In just 4 hours, silence fell over the chamber. 4 hours. A task that had taken other species decades had been conquered in a single afternoon. The Zirek judges exchanged nervous glances. This was not supposed to happen. The next stage was the terrain shift, a brutal endurance test, where the environment itself turned hostile. Gravity doubled, temperatures fluctuated between freezing and boiling, and the terrain became a shifting nightmare of razor-sharp cliffs and unpredictable seismic activity. Most species took 50 years to navigate this section, adapting slowly, learning through trial and error. The Zirek smiled to themselves, confident that this would finally slow the humans down. But they did not know humans. Instead of cautiously testing the environment, the humans ran forward. Their bodies adjusted quickly, their breathing adapted, and their movements became fluid and precise. They were using technology and raw survival instincts, adjusting faster than any species before them. They used drones to scout the terrain, built instant shelters against the weather, and kept moving forward. The alien spectators, once amused, now watched in stunned silence as the humans blitzed through the stage in mere hours. By the end of the first day, humanity had shattered every record in history. The once arrogant alien leaders now whispered in concern. They weren't supposed to finish this fast, one Zirek judge muttered, his hands shaking. If they keep going at this speed. Another voice trailed off, too horrified to complete the thought. The truth was undeniable. The trial that had humbled empires, that had broken the spirits of entire civilizations was being torn apart by a species that had only just arrived on the galactic stage. And as the first day ended, Commander Graves looked up at the towering monolith, his face calm. "That was the warm-up," he said, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. "Now let's get serious." Across the galaxy, alien rulers, generals, and warlords felt a chill run down their spines. Humanity was not like the others, and if this was just the beginning, then the galaxy had every reason to be afraid. The Zirac tribunal chamber was filled with an uneasy silence. What had begun as a grand spectacle, a moment to watch humanity stumble and fail, had become something entirely different. The humans had torn through the first stage in hours, something no species had done in centuries. The alien leaders, once relaxed and mocking, now watched with narrowed eyes. The Zirac judges, their authority built on the prestige of this ancient trial, could feel their power slipping. If humanity completed the test too quickly, if they made a mockery of the century trial, the entire galactic order could shift. The second phase of the trial activated, the survival gauntlet, a massive, ever-changing arena that simulated the most extreme and hostile environments in the known universe. Toxic wastelands, crushing gravity, acid rain, carnivorous plants, and deadly alien predators. The Zirac had designed this phase to test adaptability. Most species required decades to study and develop techniques to endure the conditions. But the moment the trial began, the humans moved like they had already been here before. The arena flashed, shifting into an acidic swamp where the air itself was poisonous. A death trap that had wiped out entire teams in past centuries. The Joltak ambassador smirked. "Watch them choke," he whispered. But he barely finished his sentence before the humans activated their sealed suits, adjusted their air filters, and moved forward without hesitation. They scanned the toxic plants, took samples, and within minutes had created a natural antidote. The arena changed again. Bone-crushing gravity. The floor became heavy, pressing down with force strong enough to break bones and crush organs. The Zirac themselves had taken years to condition their bodies to this stage. The humans, they laughed. One of them, a soldier named Sergeant Dias, started doing push-ups. The alien spectators gasped as the humans barely slowed down. Their bodies had already adapted, their training on Earth and in space conditioning them for intense gravitational shifts. Some of them even looked like they were enjoying the challenge. The arena fought back. Hunting creatures emerged, monstrous beings with razor-sharp claws and camouflage abilities that made them invisible. The kind of predators that had stalked the most advanced warriors of the past. The Zirac leaned forward, expecting panic. Instead, they heard something else. Laughter. "Man, they look like overgrown lizards," one of the humans chuckled. "Who wants a new pair of boots?" Then, without hesitation, the humans attacked. But they didn't fight blindly. They analyzed. They watched how the creatures moved, tested their reflexes, figured out their weaknesses within minutes. Then, in coordinated strikes, they took them down. A hunt had been set up for the humans, but now the humans were the hunters. The audience was in shock. The Zirac judges exchanged nervous glances. This is not possible," one whispered. "No species has ever moved through this phase so quickly." But the truth was undeniable. Humanity was not struggling. They were conquering. Hours passed, and the humans pushed forward relentlessly. Every trap, every trick, every deadly shift in the arena was met with a new strategy, a new adaptation. Other species had always needed time to adjust, but humans learned instantly. They weren't just survivors. They were problem solvers. By the time the first day ended, the humans had cut through more than half the trial. A test meant to take a century was being ripped apart in mere hours. For the first time in history, the galaxy felt true fear. And in the tribunal halls, the Zirac leaders whispered among themselves. "This cannot continue," one said. "If the humans finish this test too quickly, Another nodded, his voice low with realization. Then the balance of power will never be the same again. The Zirac tribunal chamber was no longer filled with the smug arrogance it once held. The carefully constructed century trial, designed to push civilizations to their absolute limits over generations, was being torn apart by a single group of humans in mere hours. The alien spectators, leaders, generals, and scholars from across the galaxy had gathered to watch humanity fail. Instead, they were watching history being rewritten. The third phase of the trial was designed to test ingenuity, endurance, and raw intelligence. It was where most species truly suffered, often spending decades or centuries before completing even a fraction of the tasks. The Zirac had always believed it to be the ultimate test of a civilization's worth. The humans. They were treating it like a puzzle-solving competition. The trial's next environment changed in an instant, a vast, frozen wasteland where temperatures dropped to absolute lethal levels. Winds strong enough to peel the flesh from bone howled across the landscape. The Zirac judges leaned forward. This phase had broken species before. Here, competitors were meant to struggle for generations, passing down knowledge on how to survive until, slowly, they adapted enough to move forward. But the humans, they simply activated their thermal gear. One of them, a woman named Lieutenant Avery, grinned as she adjusted her suit's heating system. "Well, this is just a Tuesday in Antarctica," she joked. Another human, Sergeant Carter, started assembling an emergency survival shelter out of the surrounding materials within minutes. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving. The Zirac overseers watched in disbelief as the humans didn't just endure the cold. They built defenses, created heat sources, and even started setting up traps in case of predators. The trial was supposed to break them, but instead, they were getting comfortable. Then came the mental challenge. The trial shifted again, replacing the frozen tundra with a massive underground labyrinth, a maze of endless tunnels, shifting pathways, and mind-bending illusions. It was built to confuse and disorient, to test problem-solving abilities over centuries of trial and error. Every species that entered spent generations mapping its layout, marking the paths to avoid being trapped forever. The humans. They brought out a drone. Deploying mapping software, one of them said, sending the small machine buzzing through the air. Within minutes, they had a full map of the labyrinth. No trial and error. No getting lost. They simply figured it out instantly. One of the Zirac judges clenched his jaw. "They're not playing by the rules," he hissed. A fellow judge gave him a sharp look. "There are no rules. The test is meant to be conquered however possible." The first judge narrowed his eyes. "Then why is this the first time in history that a species has done it this fast?" The realization was settling in now. Humanity wasn't just passing the trial. They were crushing it in a way that had never been seen before. The next phase was supposed to be one of the most exhausting tests yet, a task meant to break the will of competitors. It required species to manually construct an energy bridge, using primitive tools, over an unstable canyon with constant seismic activity. The Zirac had specifically designed this phase to test patience, cooperation, and engineering skills over time. But once again, the humans weren't interested in wasting time. One of them, a burly engineer named Reynolds, studied the materials for a few moments before looking at his team. "All right, this is dumb. We can build a bridge, sure, but why walk when we can fly?" The Zirac spectators barely had time to react before the humans constructed a set of reinforced grappling hooks, launching themselves across the canyon in minutes. Where other species had taken decades to carefully construct pathways, humanity had simply skipped the problem altogether. The arena monitors flickered. The Zirac judges exchanged dark glances. The murmurs among the galactic leaders grew louder. "They're not supposed to be able to do this," one alien general whispered. "Nothing says they can't," another replied, his voice uneasy. The humans were proving something dangerous, not just their intelligence, not just their resilience, but their ability to think outside the limitations that other species had blindly accepted. The Zirac had ruled the galactic trials for millennia under the assumption that no species could ever complete them in less than 100 years. But now, humanity was about to do it in one day. The Zirac leaders were no longer just watching. They were afraid. If humans were capable of dismantling the greatest test of endurance, intelligence, and survival in mere hours, what else were they capable of? One Zirac official turned to his commander, his voice shaking. "We have to stop them." Panic spread through the Zirac tribunal. The aliens who had once laughed at humanity's arrogance were now gripping their seats in fear. The Grand Century Trial, meant to take 100 years of suffering, learning, and slow progress, was being shattered in mere hours. The monitors displayed live footage of the humans moving through the trial at blistering speed. The other species who had attempted this test before had spent generations trying to survive, passing knowledge from parents to children, adapting to the trial's endless difficulties. Humanity. They were treating it like a speedrun. The next phase of the trial should have been a breaking point. A vast, endless desert stretched before them, filled with shifting sands that swallowed travelers whole. The heat was merciless. The air was thin. The hidden predators beneath the surface waited for their prey to make a single mistake. The Zirac judges whispered among themselves. This phase had always been the slowest part of the trial. Most species spent hundreds of years just mapping the desert, learning where to find water, shelter, and safe paths. Many civilizations never even made it past this point. But humanity, they were already halfway across it. The Zirac officials watched in stunned horror as the humans deployed drones, scanned the terrain, and mapped out every threat within minutes. Instead of slowly learning by failure, they identified the safest routes instantly. Instead of struggling to find water, they synthesized it using portable extractors. Instead of falling prey to sand-dwelling predators, they hunted them first. One of the Zirac judges, a high-ranking overseer named Kvarn, slammed his fist on the table. "They're ruining the purpose of the test." Another judge, an elder named Yulvas, narrowed his gaze. "No, they're showing us something we were never prepared to see." The other alien leaders in the tribunal chamber listened in silence. Some of them had long respected the Zirac trials as a measure of a species' worth. Others had seen them as a cruel joke, a way for the Zirac to maintain control over the galactic hierarchy. But now, watching humanity effortlessly dismantle what was meant to be an eternal challenge, they saw something terrifying. The rules of the galaxy were changing. Humanity wasn't just beating the trial. They were defying every expectation, every limitation, every carefully crafted hardship that had kept other species crawling through the mud for centuries. The final desert checkpoint was meant to test persistence. It was a brutal, isolated watchtower placed at the very edge of the endless sands, built on the ruins of long-forgotten civilizations that had never made it past this point. The Zirac's records showed that most species took at least 5 generations to reach this far. The humans. They arrived in 4 hours. A single Zirac monitor technician trembled as the latest reports came in. They're requesting permission to enter the next phase already. Kvarn's mandibles clicked in fury. Denied. Yulvas exhaled. "You know we can't stop them." The tribunal fell into silence. Out in the field, Captain Elena Vasquez wiped sweat from her brow as she stood at the edge of the desert, looking up at the towering checkpoint that had stood as an impossible milestone for so many civilizations before them. She activated her comms. "We're at the final desert checkpoint. What's next?" Back at the human command station, a voice came through her earpiece. "Admiral Hayes, the mission commander. You're making the Zirac nervous, Captain." Elena grinned. "Good." She looked back at her team. Despite the harshest conditions the trial could throw at them, they were laughing, joking, completely unfazed. Some were even betting on how much time they could shave off the next phase. She turned back toward the horizon, where the final stage of the trial loomed like a mountain of nightmares. The last challenge. the phase that had never been completed by any species. The Zirac had always assumed it was simply impossible, a test meant to prove that no species was ever truly ready. The humans. They were ready. And the entire galaxy was watching in fear. In the grand chamber of the Zirac tribunal, silence reigned. Every alien leader, every elder judge, every high-ranking official sat frozen as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. The final trial had stood for over 1,000 years. It was designed to be unbeatable, a test that no species had ever conquered. The very idea of victory was a lie, a myth meant to humble every civilization that attempted it. But now, humanity stood at its gates. The Zirac architects had created this last challenge as the ultimate measure of endurance and adaptability. A deep labyrinthine fortress carved into a mountainside, filled with puzzles, traps, and relentless environmental hazards. Those who entered rarely returned, and those who did came back broken. Other species had tried for centuries, building slowly, step by step. They established generations of research teams, sending explorers who would spend their entire lives mapping just one level. The idea was to learn over hundreds of years, to pass down knowledge, and to accept that only patience and slow progress could ever hope to make a difference. That was the way it was meant to be. Humanity disagreed. From the moment Captain Elena Vasquez and her team entered the fortress, everything changed. The first chamber was designed as a psychological trap, a maze that altered itself constantly, shifting its pathways, creating endless dead ends. Other species had spent decades trying to map it. The humans. They solved it in minutes. Drone surveillance, advanced AI mapping, and sheer problem-solving speed allowed them to tear through the maze with ruthless efficiency. Where other species had crawled blindly in the dark, humanity moved with purpose. The second challenge was brutal. A chamber that tested endurance through extreme environmental changes. Freezing temperatures, suffocating heat, sudden bursts of radiation, all designed to force the weak to turn back. Humanity adapted instantly. Specialized survival suits adjusted to the shifts. Internal biomonitors regulated their vitals. They worked together, covering each other's weaknesses, pushing forward as a single, unstoppable force. By the time they reached the third challenge, the Zirac judges were in a state of shock. "No," Kvarn hissed, his voice trembling. "This isn't how it's supposed to happen." But Yulvas, the elder judge, simply watched in silence. His many eyes blinked slowly, his mind calculating what this truly meant. The trial had never been about victory. It was a lesson in humility, a way to show every species that no matter how strong, how clever, how advanced they thought they were, the universe was always stronger. But humanity wasn't bowing. They weren't learning the lesson the Zirac had designed. They were rewriting it. The final chamber of the fortress was a tomb, a place of despair. The very air inside drained energy, slowing movements, weakening the body and mind. The walls seemed to whisper, pulling at the souls of those who entered. Elena Vasquez stood in the center of it. Her team, exhausted but unbroken, gathered around her. The remains of a long-dead civilization were scattered across the floor, proof that no one had ever survived this place. And yet, here they stood. She activated her comms. "Admiral, we've reached the end." Back at the human command station, Admiral Hayes' voice came through. "What do you see?" Elena exhaled, looking at the final monument in the center of the room, a massive, ancient structure filled with unreadable glyphs. It had been waiting for someone, waiting for a species that would not break. "We see the truth," she said. This wasn't a test. It was a grave. Behind her, her team prepared to do what no species had ever done. They would leave this place not as survivors, but as victors. And the entire galaxy, watching in horror, knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The chamber was silent. Too silent. Even though the fortress was ancient, so old that no one even remembered who built it, there was a weight in the air, a crushing presence that pressed down on the human team. It was not just the past watching them. It was the entire galaxy. Every major species, every empire, every observer who had tuned in to witness humanity's inevitable failure was now staring at something they could not comprehend. Humanity had not failed. They had conquered the unconquerable. Captain Elena Vasquez turned slowly, scanning the final chamber. It was supposed to be a trap, a place where hope withered, where minds broke, where the last test was not of the body but of the spirit. The Zirac had crafted it perfectly, a room designed to make any being lose their will to continue. The whispers in the air, the shifting shadows, the feeling of utter loneliness, all of it worked together to crush the soul. And yet, the humans stood firm. The fortress had drained the life from thousands over the centuries, but Elena could still hear the strong, steady breaths of her team. She could still feel the determination radiating from them. "This is it," she said quietly, approaching the towering monument at the heart of the room. The unreadable glyphs, the intricate carvings, they told a story older than any civilization in the galaxy. A warning, a lesson, a final deception. Her fingers brushed against the surface, and suddenly, the room came alive. The walls pulsed, the air shuddered. A deep, echoing vibration filled the chamber as the final trial activated. Back in the Zirek tribunal, the alien judges recoiled. Kuvarn let out a sharp hiss, his mandibles clicking together in pure panic. "No, it cannot. This should not be possible." Yulvas, the eldest of them, did not move. His countless eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching as humanity faced the moment no species was ever meant to reach. His voice, barely above a whisper, carried through the chamber. They were never supposed to come this far. Inside the fortress, a storm of illusions erupted. The past itself rose to stop them. The air rippled as phantom warriors formed out of nothing. Echoes of every species that had ever died in this place. Alien figures, their faces twisted in pain, their bodies flickering like fading memories, surrounded the humans. "You are not welcome here," a hollow voice whispered. It did not come from a single source, but from everywhere at once. The fortress itself was speaking. The illusions lunged. The galaxy watched, waiting for humanity to break. But instead, the humans fought. Elena raised her rifle, and her team did the same. Weapons fired, but the bullets passed through the phantoms. The enemy was not made of flesh, it was made of fear. "That's it," Elena murmured. She lowered her weapon. "They want us to be afraid." The illusions pressed closer, their whispers growing louder, their forms stretching into nightmares. For any other species, this would have been the end. The final lesson. The realization that no matter how strong they were, some things in the universe could not be defeated. But humans did not accept lessons of weakness. They created new lessons. Elena took a step forward. "You are not real." The phantoms hesitated. "We are humanity," she continued, her voice steady. "We do not fear the dark. We like the dark." Her team stood with her. They did not cower, did not tremble. They did what no species had ever done in this chamber. They refused to surrender. The fortress shook. The illusions flickered. And then, they shattered. The walls trembled, the whispers became screams, and then, silence. The storm was over. The test was done. And the humans were still standing. Across the galaxy, entire species watched in stunned disbelief. The Zirac judges, the elder councils, the warlords and emperors, they all knew what this meant. Humanity had passed a trial that was never meant to be passed. And in that moment, as the last illusions faded into nothing, a terrible realization settled over the galaxy. This had not been a simple test of endurance. This had been a measure of dominance. And humanity had just proven they were stronger than the galaxy itself. The fortress stood silent, not in ruin, not in defeat, but in awe. It had tested, tormented, and broken every species that dared to challenge it. For centuries, civilizations had come, their best warriors, their greatest minds, their strongest wills, all had entered, and all had failed. But today, for the first time in history, the test had been conquered. Humanity stood at the heart of the fortress, unbroken. Captain Elena Vasquez exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. Around her, her team remained standing, their eyes fixed on the final monument that had once radiated an almost unkillable presence. But now it was just stone, ancient, powerful, but defeated. Behind them, the illusions were gone. The last remnants of the trial had shattered under the sheer force of humanity's willpower. The darkness that had tormented the minds of every challenger before them had vanished. And across the galaxy, the Watchers had no words. Inside the Zurich tribunal, the ruling chamber was in chaos. Screens flickered, voices shouted, reports flooded in from across the Galactic network. The news was spreading too fast. They should have failed, one council member whispered, his claws twitching. No species can resist the final trial. And yet, Yulvas, the eldest judge, did not move. His massive, multi-eyed form simply stared at the screen. They did. The implications were beyond terrifying. This fortress had been more than a test. It had been a warning. It was a monument to the limits of every species, a reminder that no matter how advanced, how strong, how intelligent an empire thought itself to be, there were forces greater than them. But humanity had just proven that wrong. "They're leaving," another judge said, voice trembling. On the screen, the human team was already making their way back toward the surface of the fortress, their mission complete. No celebration, no arrogance, just silent victory. And that made it even worse. If they had boasted, if they had gloated, if they had treated this like a mere challenge, perhaps the rest of the galaxy could have dismissed it. But instead, humanity had treated the greatest survival test ever created as if it were just another step forward. And what truly terrified the Council, what terrified the entire galaxy, was the question hanging in the air. If this was nothing to them, then what else were they capable of? The message that shook the stars. Hours later, as humanity's ship lifted off the fortress and returned to their fleet, the Zurich tribunal prepared a response. For centuries, they had controlled the flow of knowledge. They had dictated which species rose, which fell, which learned the ancient lessons, and which remained ignorant of the truth. But they could not hide this. The moment humanity stepped out of that fortress alive, the truth had already spread. Thousands of species had already seen the footage, had already watched as humans conquered the unconquerable. The Galactic network was in chaos. Some empires tried to dismiss it as luck. Others claimed it was deception. But the most powerful, the oldest, the ones who truly understood what this meant, they were silent. Because they knew. Humanity had crossed a line no species was ever supposed to cross. And now, the galaxy had no idea what to do next. The humans knew the truth. Aboard their ship, Elena Vasquez sat in the command center, staring out at the stars. The fortress was far behind them now, but she could still feel its weight. She knew the galaxy was watching. She knew they were afraid. She glanced at her second-in-command, Lieutenant Carter, who was monitoring the incoming transmissions. "How bad is it?" she asked. He smirked. "Bad. Some are panicking. Some are calling us monsters. Others." He hesitated, then turned to face her. "Others want to talk." Elena raised an eyebrow. Carter leaned forward. "For centuries, no one has beaten that test. That fortress was supposed to be a universal truth, a reminder that there are limits no species can overcome." He exhaled sharply. "And we just destroyed that idea." A long silence followed. Then Elena smirked. "Well," she said, leaning back in her chair, "they better get used to it." Because humanity had just rewritten the rules of the galaxy.